Hello, sleepy voyagers. Tonight, your path curves inward toward the glowing edge of Mercury, the innermost world, closest to the sun's endless fire. Here, silence meets extremes. You'll stand where shadows stretch sharp across ancient rock, and the sky stays black even at noon. Time stretches long between sunrises, and the light touches every stone like it has waited 1,000 years to arrive. Before we begin our descent, tap like so this journey can find you again, and subscribe to join our crew for nightly voyages. Drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is. I love seeing our constellation of listeners glowing gently around the globe. Now take a moment to dim the lights, lower your screen brightness, and if you like, let a soft hum or gentle tone play in the background. A quiet companion to Mercury's long, radiant days and frozen, silent nights. This isn't just a story. It's your slow walk across a planet where time holds still between extremes. When you're ready, close your eyes. You've arrived at Mercury. No storms, no air, no weather, just a sky that never stirs. On Mercury, silence isn't the absence of sound. It's a landscape you can rest inside. That's where we're going. In the next minutes, you'll feel time slow as a day that lasts about 176 Earth days stretches open. Light moves without urgency, craters keep centuries of shadow, and your mind follows the simplest pattern: stone, shadow, breath. If sleep has been resisting you, let a world with nothing to prove teach your thoughts how to be still. Why does your heart beat slow as the sun grows larger? You coast into high orbit, and the star fills more of the view, bright and undistorted, yet your pulse eases. Mercury turns below with the care of a clock that refuses to hurry. The ship trims speed to match that measured drift, tiny thrusters whispering, then going quiet as the path settles. You expect glare. You get a deep, unlit sky and a clean white disk edged with fire that does not spill. The stillness is simple, and your body reads it faster than your thoughts do. High above the surface, the orbit holds wide and even. The horizon bends away in a slow, shallow curve, a gentle arc that accepts your glide. You set a track that keeps the sun's limb almost fixed against the frame, a steady sliver, a constant reference. Small corrections keep the circle true. The hull hums at a low, regular note, a vibration you can follow without effort. It turns into a metronome for your chest and lungs. Count in, count out, the numbers lengthening on their own. The noise floor on the instruments drops. So does the impulse to scan. Being near the sun should feel urgent. It does not. The view holds bright certainty, but the darkness around it stays absolute, unsoftened by haze or gold wash. There is no atmosphere here to scatter light, no veil to halo edges or blur shadows. Daylight lands where it lands and stops. Darkness remains exact. The sun looks large, but it behaves with strict boundaries. Your eyes adjust to the contrast. Your mind follows. You trace an orbital path designed to remove surprises. Keep the star tangent to the rim of the planet, and the motion slows to a crawl. The geometry cancels haste. As Mercury turns below, its spin links to its trip around the sun in a measured ratio. That relationship stretches the solar day and drags the sunrise into a long event. The ground under the limb changes, but not fast, not in jolts. The scene agrees with rest. The ship rides that agreement. Every circuit, you mark the same crater chain sliding by at the same pace. Every circuit, the hull finds the same tone and holds it. The vibration is not loud. It is even. You feel it in your palms and through the seat, a thread you can keep. This regularity removes the need to anticipate. Muscles that brace in busy skies let go here. Shoulders drop without you asking them to. The breath deepens and stops meeting resistance on the exhale. The sun looks closer than you are used to, and that scale tricks your expectations. You wait for the blast of glare, for fluttering shadows, for atmosphere to turn light into weather. Nothing like that happens. Without air, photons travel straight. The boundary between lit and unlit stays sharp. Even the face of the star holds steady, because there is no shimmering veil to ripple it. The edge is a line. The ground below cuts that line into crescents and arcs, and those shapes move so slowly that you can track them with one unbroken stare. Your pupils stop chasing. In a place where days stretch and dawn lingers, time loosens. The coupling between Mercury's spin and its path around the sun makes the solar cycle longer than its year. You do not need the numbers to feel the effect. You feel it in the rate at which the bright rim crawls over familiar terrain. You feel it in the way the ship's shadow slides with the same patience when it crosses the surface later. The system's timing enters your body as a cue. Nothing is about to happen. Nothing demands. The black of space frames the disk like velvet, but you do not need flourishes. You notice instead the absence of scatter, the way shadows thrown by the planet fall clean against the void. The ship banks by fractions, and the roll settles to zero. In that quiet attitude, the hum reads like a pulse that is not yours, yet sits near yours, a companion rhythm. You align with it without trying, the way a foot finds a slow beat in a quiet room. Inhale for a count that reaches farther than it does at home. Let the exhale travel longer than the inhale. The cycle repeats, steady as the track. The mind brings scripts to bright things, caution, urgency, scan for change. The view cancels those scripts one by one. No haze to flicker, no clouds to surge, no wind to push the ship. Only the shape of a world and the star it faces, locked in a pace that allows no rush. You expected noise and got geometry. You expected heat as a wave and found radiance as a constant. The mismatch releases tension. The nervous system understands before words arrive. Pressure lowers. The jaw unhooks. The space behind the eyes softens. You glance across the terminator line and see how the border holds. The dark is fully dark. The bright is fully bright. There is comfort in clean separation. Your course keeps that boundary near, a guide strip in the window. The sun's limb stays pinned a finger's width from the rim of the planet. You could keep it there for hours. Every loop repeats the same slow reveal of highlands and basins, rotated by degrees you can count if you want to, or not count at all. Repetition does the counting for you. As minutes pass, the beat in the hull and the slow change below line up with your own timing. Breath by breath, your cadence dilates. The chest rises, pauses, lowers, pauses. The pauses lengthen slightly each time, not by plan, but by permission. Your body accepts Mercury's schedule and mirrors it. The lower gravity you will feel later is not here yet, but you adopt the idea of less pull anyway. The orbit holds you without effort. The ship asks for no corrections beyond a nudge now and then. Ease becomes the default state. Your heartbeat meets this pace and yields. The sun is large, unmoving in its certainty. The sky around it is black and quiet. The ship is a small thing in a very stable drawing. You take another breath that reaches further and empties slower. The count is long even, unforced. You notice the way your hands rest. You notice the way the shoulders have stayed low for several breaths now. The hull hum stays the same. You tilt the nose a degree toward the lit limb. Ahead, the bright edge of day glides over stone in a crawl, not a strike. You follow that motion and let it set the next breath. What does a sunrise look like when it takes months to finish? You hold the ship steady and let the dayside edge advance. It does not rush. It walks forward like a slow tide crossing a flat beach, the bright line easing over plains and crater rims without a twitch. The sun is large, far larger than you know from home, and still it refuses to sweep. It keeps its place with measured intent, letting the planet turn through its light instead of chasing across the sky. You watch the contact point where day touches night, and it barely shifts. Your body notices the lack of hurry before your mind gives it a name. From this height, a single crater becomes a clock. The rim stands as a clean ring, and light meets it like a ruler sliding across a map. One beam grazes the highest point and begins a crawl. It moves grain by grain, spilling into the bowl with no spill at all, just a steady, precise advance. A wedge of brightness stretches down the inner wall and stops at a ledge, holds, then reveals another step as the sun's angle changes by fractions. The crater floor stays black a long while. Sharp edges settle your sight. The boundary between dark and bright does not smear. You follow the line the way you might follow a finger across a page, word by word, without skipping. Mercury's timing makes this behavior. The planet turns 3 times on its axis for every 2 trips around the sun, a deliberate coupling that lengthens the solar day and drags dawn out. The orbit pulls hard at one end and eases at the other, so the sun's apparent path becomes peculiar. It can slow, pause, and at certain long moments, suggest a reversal before it continues. At the surface, that strangeness translates into a drawn-out morning that refuses to rush through its steps. Even from orbit, you feel the stretch in the way shadows do not hurry to slide. Think of light here like breathing done in long counts. Inhale to 5, hold to 5, exhale to 5, hold again. The sun's climb follows that kind of rhythm. It lifts a little, lingers, then lifts again. Nothing jerks. Nothing starts with a surprise. Your eyes can choose a feature, a ripple of regolith on the crater's lip, a tiny boulder at the brink, and watch the light reach it as if counting. The count extends without effort because the motion supports it. The bright disk looks immense, but its progress across the ground remains an exercise in restraint. You compare without making comparisons. On Earth, azimuth angles tick along with pace you can feel. Here, the rate slows, especially near the terminator where the sun skims low. Dawn and dusk become extended chapters, not quick introductions to day and night. If you were standing on that inner wall, The shadow would retreat in centimeters per minute, then millimeters. You would have time to trace the line with your toe and never catch up to it. Up here, that slow march reads as a calm sentence that takes many breaths to finish. The result is that your nervous system runs out of things to anticipate. The longer the dawn, the fewer surprises. The fewer surprises, the easier the mind lets go of scanning and settles into noticing. Light leaves no guesswork. It moves with a plan you can see. You return to the rim and watch the bright advance fill a cleft. It meets one tiny stone and splits around it, leaving a dark teardrop of shadow that holds its shape for long minutes before shrinking. The geometry is simple, and that simplicity is kind. Your pulse falls into step with it. The sun's size adds to the effect. The disk looms at 2.5 times the width you know, and that scale turns the smallest shift into a slow recalculation of the scene. Where you expect a slash of glare across the crater mouth, you get a uniform sheet, firm, not harsh. Without air to scatter light, the edges stay exact. The shadow's border reads as a line cut with a blade. The rim's microtexture shows in the clean contrast, each grain registering as the bright encroaches. Nothing flickers. The lack of shimmer keeps your gaze from chasing. It can rest. The ship drifts with the same patience. The terminator stays near, the window framing a narrow zone where light creeps and darkness holds. You keep your attention on the moving edge and feel your breathing link to it. The inhale maps to the bright gain. The exhale maps to the shadow's slow retreat. Between each, there is a pause that matches the way the sun seems to hesitate, not because time stopped, but because the rate of change fell low enough for your awareness to count it. That count stretches longer than any you keep at home, and it does not strain. Down on the plain beyond the crater, a field of low ripples takes the light in parallel strokes. Bright bands lengthen, dark bands thin. Each ridge accepts the reveal in turn, a sequence that reaches across kilometers, like a quiet chord played note by note. In another place, a shallow scarp starts to glow along its crest, while the base stays in night. You measure progress by the slow emergence of one boulder, then a second, then the hint of a third. The sequence becomes predictable, and the brain, relieved of guessing, tucks its thoughts into order. Even when Mercury moves through parts of its orbit where the sun's apparent motion complicates, the change at the ground still speaks in the same calm voice. The light climbs, rests, climbs again. The drawn-out sunrise removes the rush you bring with you. It gives your senses a lane and keeps them in it. You do not need to keep checking the time. The scene holds it for you. By the time the beam that first touched the rim completes its passage, and the floor of the crater starts to show detail, your breathing has stretched. The slow arc outside sets a metronome that does not waver. Thoughts that arrived with edges lose those edges. They arrange themselves like stones placed evenly along a path, spaced wide enough that you can step between without crowding. You keep your gaze on the bright line and let it do the counting. The ship dips toward the boundary where day meets night. Contrast strengthens, and with it, comfort. You follow the edge, letting the clean divide guide you toward the place where light and shadow share a calm, unbroken line. Why is the line between day and night the calmest place on a harsh world? You turn the ship until the terminator runs true along the window, a quiet seam where brightness and blackness meet without struggle. The boundary sits steady, not because the world is mild, but because the world is honest. Light stops where rock blocks it. Shadow begins where light cannot reach. The path locks to that shared edge, and your attention narrows with it. You fly the edge, nose trimmed to keep the sun just out of view. The bright side holds firm, the dark side holds firm, and between them, the change is slow enough to count. Surface temperatures on either side sit far apart, yet to your eyes the shift reads as a simple switch of tone. No haze lifts, no glow bleeds. You can follow the divide the way you trace a shoreline on a still lake, and the stillness transfers to your chest. Shadows lengthen without wind. Grains do not shuffle. They stay where ancient impacts left them. With no air to stir dust, nothing lifts or drifts. Each pebble throws a needle-sharp shape that grows by degrees as the sun's angle lowers. You watch one small stone carry a dagger of night twice, 3 times its height. The blade extends across a flat and does not waver. The ground holds its silence as if sound were a rumor that never arrived. The lack of an atmosphere removes twilight. There is no blue rise, no gentle wash to soften edges. The terminator is clean. Light lands, stops and draws a line. Darkness holds its own without penumbra. This clarity reveals texture the way a slow hand reveals a grain in wood. Ridges stand out in relief. Subtle ripples across old lava plains resolve into bands that carry the same spacing for kilometers. Your eyes do not need to adjust for shimmer or glare. They settle and stay. You angle lower until the ship's own shadow finds the surface and joins the planet's script of dark marks. It appears as a compact shape at first, then stretches as your path shifts over the curve. The motion is there, but barely. The silhouette drifts across small craters and shallow swells, a soft stamp that never breaks its outline. Watching it, you feel your pulse fall into the same near-still drift, each beat leaving more room around it. On the day side, stones endure heat that climbs high. On the night side, frost-hard cold remains. The transition between those states would roar if air carried it. Here it does not. Heat moves by radiation, silent and steady. Even as one side warms toward extremes and the other sinks to deep cold, the view remains slow and exact. The eye reads contrast, not turmoil. The senses trust what they see. You pick a scarp near the boundary and follow its crest. Along the lit face, a steady gray brightens toward white. Along the dark face, the gray deepens to black. The edge is a ruler. No eddies curl off it, no flickers dance. The brain receives a single, continuous line, and that line becomes an anchor. You feel the mental search pattern relax. No need to scan the frame. The answer to what next is this again, and that repetition is kind. Far below, a chain of tiny pits shows the same lesson. Each pit holds a pool of night, the rims rimmed in light. The sun climbs a fraction, and a thin ledge appears along one inner wall, then another. The pace is so measured, you can match it to your breath. Inhale as the highlight touches the lip. Exhale as it creeps a finger's width deeper. Pause as it seems to stop. Begin again as it resumes. The cycle carries no surprises, which lets your muscles shed their last small guards. Even the horizon behaves with restraint. It does not glow. It does not bleed color. It draws a clean arc where the bright ends and the black begins. That arc moves so slowly that, for long minutes, it reads as unmoving. You understand change not by watching the edge slide, but by noticing a new pebble's shadow appear, or a ridge's far side accept a blade of light. The mind rewrites urgency into patience without effort. Without wind, there is no noise in the shadows. You pass over a field where each boulder throws a precise wedge that points away from the sun. None of those wedges flickers. Their tips glide at a rate you can barely detect. You choose one and stay with it until you see it shift against a mark on the ground. That is your proof of time. It is enough. Your body uses the proof to release one notch further. The ship holds attitude, holding the terminator as a guide rail. The hum in the hull remains low and unbroken. With the visual field so sparse, each detail earns weight. The brain, starved of clutter, rests on the single edge the way a hand rests on a railing in the dark. The monotony is not dull, it is supportive. It says, "Stay here, nothing will jump." You glance dayside and see brightness without shimmer. You glance nightside and see black that takes everything in. The edge between them keeps its tone, its straight talk, its refusal to blur. That refusal calms. Your shoulders set into an easy slope, the corners of your jaw loosen. The breath finds an even split between in and out, with a short, natural pause at the ends. You let the pause lengthen one more count. The calm is not an absence. It is a product of what is not present. No clouds to scatter, no air to glow, no gust to move dust. The result is an honest image, and honesty is restful. Your nervous system, freed from scanning, sits down on the inside and listens to the quiet. Attention rests on the line, then on your own inhale, then back on the line. This is enough movement to satisfy the part of you that watches, without exciting the part that flinches. You edge the ship deeper into shadow. Bright surfaces withdraw from the window, and the black expands until it holds most of the frame. Contrast remains, but it softens, not by blur, but by the simple fact that there is less to compare. The star sits behind the rim now. Instruments read the same, low hum. Your breath keeps the count you borrowed from the boundary. You follow the shadow inward, and the growing night steadies your senses. How can a crater become a lullaby? You descend, and the surface opens into repetitions that the eye can keep. Large basins hold smaller circles. Overlapping rims weave shallow arcs that meet and separate without fuss. From above, what looked chaotic begins to sort itself. The higher you were, the more it felt like noise. As you drop, the noise turns into a rhythm. Lines repeat at steady intervals. Bright slopes face the sun. Dark bowls keep their shape. Your breathing follows the order you see. Impacts wrote the landscape. You know the force behind these marks was fierce. None of that force lives here now. The evidence remains, but urgency has left the scene. Old collisions produced rings that settled. Debris hardened into plains. Over ages, new strikes added smaller bowls on top of older ones. The record shows each act, but the page no longer shouts its story. It reads in a calm, even tone. You let your eyes move across it at the same pace. A wide, bright arc on the horizon starts to resolve as part of a larger structure. The colorous region spreads in quiet rings, nested like ripples that forgot the splash that made them. Rims echo each other at set distances. Between them, smooth ground fills with minimal texture, broad sheets that look poured, then cooled. The shapes repeat with slight shifts, enough to hold attention without pulling it forward. You can track one ring until it fades, then pick up the next without strain. In the space between these rings, smaller craters gather like notes in a simple tune. A fresh bowl sits crisp with sharp edges, while an older one slumps at the rim, softened by time. A chain of tiny impacts steps diagonally across a flat and continues past the edge of your frame, then reappears after a brief gap, still marching. The pattern survives distance, which makes it easy for your mind to hold. You do not need to work to see the order. The order announces itself. Plane meets rim, rim meets scarp, scarp meets plane again. The sequence repeats so often that your attention stops darting. The brain likes a rule it can test and confirm, and once the rule holds, it stops searching for surprises. The scanning that usually hums in the background of your thoughts quiets down. Each new stretch of ground answers the same simple expectations. A bowl here, a ridge there, a shallow ditch that runs straight for a while, then ends at a slope that carries its own finer lines. The quiet fields inside the large basin carry a different texture than the highlands. They show wide, muted expanses with subtle flows frozen in place. Color shifts hide at the edge of sight, not loud enough to distract, only enough to hint at changes in material. Long, low scarps cross these plains as soft steps, folding the surface without breaking it. Their faces throw clean shadows that repeat in length and angle. You read those shadows as measures like tick marks on an unhurried scale. Your instruments confirm what your eyes already learned. This is a surface that keeps records. The tight clusters of overlapping craters show sequences. One rim cuts another. The younger mark wins the edge, and the story stacks without noise. Now and then, a double-ringed structure appears, its inner wall catching light, while the outer wall remains in shade. The set repeats across distances, indifferent to your path. This indifference soothes. The world does not perform for you. It holds its own tempo. As you glide, the Terminator passes behind you, and the shadows shorten. Even with more light, edges remain crisp. View after view replays the same melody. Crater, plane, scarp, repeat. Your breath answers with the same triplet. In, out, pause. In, out, pause. The cycle begins to feel shared. You find a long ridge and follow it. It stays straight for more than a minute, crossing small bowls that notch its crest. Each notch hosts a tiny pool of shadow. Each pool mirrors the last. The mind, relieved of novelty, starts to rest. Predictable patterns give it a place to set itself down. Instead of inventing a plot or calculating what might appear next, it accepts the next repetition as obvious and fine. The need to plan drops away. Memory stops sorting. You notice this as a physical shift. The forehead softens, the throat unclenches. Thoughts that would normally branch now sit in single lines and go still. You pass over a field where secondary impacts have strewn beads in arcs that echo a parent crater's rim. The arcs are broken in places, but the curve persists. On the far side of the basin, a scarp cuts across the plains with a gentle offset, its face casting a shade that reads the same tone for kilometers. The sameness could bore in a different context. Here it relaxes. The eye can land anywhere and find the same few forms. That fact allows attention to drop from find to notice. In the quiet of the cabin, the ship's steady hum pairs with the landscape's minimal vocabulary. You revisit a cluster of overlapping craters and trace the order from largest to smallest, then reverse the direction. The act has no goal. It only repeats until even that small effort feels optional. Pattern replaces narrative. The surface is not telling you what happened first or last anymore. It is offering a cadence. You let the cadence set the pace of your breathing, one notch slower. Now and then, a fresher blast mark breaks the monotony with brighter ejecta, but even that contrast fits within the larger rule set. The ring shines, then fades with distance, and soon the ground returns to its usual tones. You feel a small tug to follow the brighter track. It eases as you notice another, then another, placed with the same spacing. The urge to chase gives up. The eye has what it needs. The ship stays level. The ground moves under you like a quiet chant, each line echoing the last, each break predictable. You stay with it long enough that minutes lose their sharpness, thought edges round off. You look ahead to a line that cuts the view longer than any rim, a cliff that does not end where your frame does. It calls the same way a firm, low note calls. You tilt toward it, setting a course along a scarp that runs farther than a horizon. What if mountain-long cliffs were signs of a world settling into itself? You bring the ship alongside a low, sweeping wall that bends the land without breaking it. The scarp does not roar. It folds the crust like a quiet crease pressed by a steady hand, a long-held exhale made into stone. From end to end, it keeps its line with minor steps and gentle offsets, as if the planet tucked itself in and stayed that way. Cliffs usually read as violence, the sudden lift of ground, the promise of drops and falls. Here they read as the motion after motion, the final posture after energy has gone. The face leans, not overhangs. The top rolls forward and then settles, catching light along a shallow slope, while its base keeps a band of dark that stays the same width for a long stretch. Nothing about it feels like an opening act. It feels finished. You hold parallel to the scarp, a safe offset that lets you see how its shadow behaves. The dark shape along the base does not tremble or flicker. It lies against the plane like a ruler set on a sheet, thick enough to mark, thin enough to leave margin. As the sun lifts by fractions, the shadow shortens by the same fractions, a steady reduction you can time with your breath. Inhale through the bright on the crest. Pause at the point where the slope's gray deepens. Exhale as the dark band nudges back a small step. Repeat. The cliff gives you a contour. You fit your cycle to it. These scarps trace a global habit. Over long spans, the inside cooled, and the outer skin had to take up the change. Rock does not shrink gently, but it does fold. The result is a system of lobate scarps, curved, overlapping breaks, in places hundreds of kilometers long. You follow this one because it shows the rules clearly. A long, shallow face on one side, a sharper step on the other, a continuous shadow that behaves like a metronome. The length lets you stay with it for minutes without changing anything in the cabin. The scene sustains itself. You roll slightly to keep the crest aligned with the lower edge of the window. Ridgelets on the slope run parallel for long spans, each tiny line throwing its own thin, dark trace. The repetition reaches into your chest again. Breath lengthens. Pause opens and holds. Release settles. The quiet in the hall meets the quiet on the ground, and the two rhythms find each other. Numbers here do not need to shout. A world like this may have lost several kilometers of radius as the interior tightened. Spread that inward move across an entire sphere, and you get thousands of kilometers of creases like the one beneath you. Some scarps bend through old crater rims, offsetting them by clear steps that tell age and sequence without any noise. You pass a place where the scarp slices a small bowl into a neat ledge and a lower shelf. The cut clean and final. The old rim yields. The new line holds. Names sit out there if you need them. Long scarps that arc like slow smiles across plains and highlands. You do not need to speak them to feel their length. The ship drifts along a segment that keeps going beyond your frame, past where your window ends, and into the next minute and the next. That duration is part of the effect. No short cliff could give you this kind of calm. You need the sense that the line continues to support the gaze and the breath, steady and without demand. At low sun, the shallow face turns into a gradient you can read like a graph. Bright at the top, mid-gray along the mid-slope, near black at the base, then the uniform tone of the plane. The separation is honest and clean. With no haze to soften the values, your eye knows where it is on that slope at a glance. You follow the mid-gray band, let your inhale trace along it, pause where it deepens, and let your exhale carry you over the edge into the dark at the foot. The cycle earns your trust because nothing interrupts it. The thought lands without effort. A planet closes in around its core as it cools. The outside creases to fit the inside. The shape of acceptance sits under you, written as stone leaning forward and stopping. Acceptance is not collapse, it is heldness. You notice the echo inside your own body. The abdomen eases toward the spine at the end of the exhale, not because you pull it there, but because gravity and breath agree on a neutral center. The cliff models that return to center on a planetary scale. You borrow the cue. Beyond the main face, low terraces stair-step into the plain. Each step carries a shade band with a length and width that barely change as far as you can see. You pick one terrace and track it. When it dips under an old rim, it emerges on the other side at the same height, proof of a slow, steady push that crossed different terrains without fuss. The predictability turns attention into rest. You do not ask for more. You stay with the same band, breath after breath. Where the scarp bends, the curve is broad, a sweep you can lean into without shifting the ship much. The outside edge holds its crispness. The inside keeps its soft roll. Slope angles stay within a narrow range you can sense by how the shadows behave. The line rarely breaks. When it does so in small, clean offsets that continue the pattern. Your mind, which likes to solve, runs out of problems and adopts the job of following. The job is easy. If you need a measure for weight, count how the base shadow shortens across 10 breaths. It gives back a finger's width, then another. You could try to rush it. It will not respond. It only answers to slow counts. That stubborn steadiness is kind. It tells your muscles what to do. Nothing. It tells your thoughts where to be. Here. The long wall holds the space the way a steady hand holds a shoulder, firm enough to be felt, gentle enough not to push. Cliffs that might read as threat elsewhere feel like shelter here. Contraction becomes comfort. Instead of a drop that demands caution, you find a fold that suggests enclosure. You are not pinned, you are held. The small world's pull meets that impression with the same message, less weight, same support. You settle into your seat, and the chair answers. The hull hum maintains its low note, the scarp maintains its line, and your breath maintains its length. Ahead, the steady wall meets an old basin. The scarp runs into its rim and disappears into a sweep of darkness that has not moved in an age. You bank toward that quiet, leaving the long cliff for a floor where the sun never arrives. Why do some shadows on Mercury outlive empires? You angle north until the horizon tilts and the sun slips low, skimming the rim of the world without lifting. Ahead, a crater opens at the pole, a bowl so deep and so well placed that sunlight never touches its floor. You slow, then stop the glide. The ship hangs over the rim. Brightness rings the edge like a thin crown. Inside, the dark is complete, not a gradient, but a certainty that holds. You note how close the sun feels from here, large, clear, and strong, and yet the bowl keeps its black. This is a place where geometry beats intensity. The rim rises at the right height and angle, and the star's track across the sky never climbs high enough to clear it. With Mercury's small tilt, the sun never arcs steeply over the poles. It slides low along the horizon, leaving the inner walls in permanent night. The result is a pocket that remains cold while the land just meters away bakes. You ease the ship into a hover over the shadowed floor. Sensors register a silence in the light that reaches you. Almost none does. The temperature readouts drop toward deep cold, steady, and far below the thresholds you know from temperate nights at home. Out on the rim, grains shine. In here, surfaces take no highlights. The difference is stark, clean. Your eyes read it as a line you could trace with a fingertip if the dark had a surface to touch. Frost can last here, where light cannot reach, heat cannot build. What little warmth arrives comes as stray photons and slow conduction through rock, both weak. In these pockets, water brought by comets or released from minerals can persist as ice, locked beneath a thin, dust-darkened skin that keeps it from flashing away. Mercury's tilt helps. It does not tip enough to let the sun throw light into the bowl. The darkness, left undisturbed for ages, preserves what would vanish almost anywhere else, this close to the star. You hold position over the center. The ring of light around the rim keeps its narrow width, a smooth band that marks the edge of the possible day. Inside, no penumbra dilutes the shade. Instruments cut their gain and still see little. The floor reads as level in tone, a mat that swallows detail. Your thoughts, mirroring the scene, start to lose their edges. Instead of chasing reflections and highlights, they sit. The lack of visual noise spreads inward as a quiet that does not need to be earned. Evidence for these cold stores did not arrive as spectacle. It built in layers, radar hints from Earth, then confirmation from orbital passes that mapped brightness at radio wavelengths and counted neutrons to infer hydrogen-rich deposits. The numbers pointed to water ice hiding in these permanent shadows. Temperatures here can fall far below freezing, low enough to keep volatiles locked for long spans. None of this needs an announcement. The crater holds the case in its calm, a cold so stable that time itself feels slower within it. You drift slightly to let the rim interrupt and reframe the view. The bright ring narrows as you bank, then widens again, a slow heartbeat of light. The interior does not react, no glimmer, no flare. If you stare long enough, you may start to think you see a movement in the dark. You do not. What you see is your own expectations settling. The floor keeps its tone. The mind, short on input, stops pushing for more and accepts the dark as finished. The paradox teaches by example. Near the sun, heat dominates the idea you carry with you. You brace for it. The bowl ignores the idea and obeys its shape. Distance from light equals distance from warmth. Context sets the limit. It isn't only intensity that matters, but angle and boundary, and the way surfaces lean. A world can be near a fire and still keep a pocket of winter if it guards the line of sight. You feel how that rule applies to thought as well. Closeness to noise does not require you to take it in. A single clear edge can keep a center quiet. You trace the rim again. The bright band stays precise, stones along the crest throwing thin shadows that point into the bowl like minute hands all fixed to midnight. They do not twitch. Without air, nothing stirs them. The sense of time here shifts from flow to hold. Minutes pass, but the view does not tally them with change. It tallies them with endurance. Your breathing responds. The inhale lifts, then stops. The exhale lowers, then stops. Each stop grows slightly longer, not by effort, but by ease. If you listen to the hull, you hear the same low hum as before. It doesn't vary, and that helps the dark hold. Your eyes have nothing new to catch, so your ears accept the simple tone and treat it as ground. Shrug muscles release. The space across the cheekbones softens. The brow stops rehearsing the next thought. You can stay like this as long as the fuel budget allows, and the view would not make a case to move sooner. Along the wall, a small ledge catches a thin slip of light. It appears, holds, and stays right where it is. That grip of the highlight says the sun's angle will not change much here today, or tomorrow, or in any season this world admits. The line between light and dark will not drift down that wall and reveal the floor. The floor will remain itself, cold and quiet. A darkness that keeps its shape releases your need to check on it. The check is finished before it begins. You turn the ship outward from the bowl. The ring of light fills more of the window, then most of it, and then the floor falls out of view. The emptiness inside you that matched the shadow remains untroubled as you climb. The pole recedes. The star sits off the rim again, and the plane ahead lies washed in bright, motionless light. You set a course toward that open silence, carrying the lesson of a shadow that knows how to last. What do you notice when nothing ever stirs the air? You cross the dayside, and the ground holds its pose. Dust sits where it fell. Regolith spreads in quiet mats over flats and around boulders, unbrushed by any breeze. Tracks do not fan out and fade. No gust gathers grains into little curls. The surface keeps a stillness that does not need help to continue. Your eyes land, and what they land on stays. The expectation of motion thins. At first, you wait for a flicker, a shimmer on the horizon, a ripple across a field of fines. Your gaze holds a beat, then another, and nothing answers. Stillness takes over the role motion usually plays. It becomes the only change you register. How long a shadow remains the same. How long a highlight holds its tone. You begin to read duration instead of events. That shift slows the pace inside your head without a command. The sky stays black at noon. The sun stands large and bright, but the space around it does not wash into blue. No fine dust hangs up high to make a halo. No vapor catches light. Rocks cast silhouettes with knife edges that do not quiver, not even a hair's breadth. A boulder's shadow keeps its angle and width for long stretches. When it does move, it moves in a way you have time to track with one calm breath. A world like this does not carry an atmosphere that can flow. A thin exosphere hugs the surface instead, a sparse crowd of atoms knocked free by heat and impact. They hop in ballistic arcs and fall back. They do not meet each other often. They do not bind into currents. Without pressure to move, there are no winds to lift dust, no clouds to form, no fronts to cross. The visual field drops to the essentials: light, rock, shadow. With that drop, your nervous system stops bracing for interruptions. There is no rustle to cut through your attention, no gust to rattle the ship, no sudden cloud edge to throw a bright patch into your periphery. Even the idea of being interrupted loosens. You notice it leaving like a held breath that releases all the way to empty. The cabin hum holds a low tone. The window holds the same few shapes. Heat on the ground can spike. Sunlit slopes climb hot. Nightside ground sinks to deep cold. Yet in the absence of air, heat travels as radiation and through the rock itself. No convective plumes rise. No thermals dance. Warmth builds and leaves without spectacle. Surfaces take on temperature quietly and yield it quietly. The sensory field stays sparse. Your eyes stay on edges and lines instead of chasing glitter or haze. That sparseness matters. When the scene removes the quick changes, your brain reduces its scan. It stops asking what it might have missed. It stops listening for cues that a change is coming. Monotony, when gentle, becomes a relief. You recognize the same few forms again and again. A plain of fines with low ripples, a spread of small craters in a chain, a rock with a narrow shade. The mind, seeing no threat and no demand, sinks into the rhythm of what repeats. You test the stillness against time. Choose a shadow point on a ridge. Hold it in the center of the frame. Count 3 breaths. Count 5. The edge keeps its straightness. The tip shifts so slightly, you mark progress only when a grain-scale speck that was dark becomes bright. That is your time stamp. It comes slow. The pace suits your chest. You do not push the count longer. It becomes longer because the scene supports it. Even the horizon gives no hint of motion beyond the planet's slow turn. No gust raises a veil of dust to fade distant forms. No glint flickers and dies. A crater rim stays a clean arc. A distant scarp holds its line. The more you look, the easier it is to keep looking, because looking requires so little energy. Eyes stop darting. Pupils stay steady. The small muscles that track and refocus rest. Over a patch of newer ejecta, you find bright rays that streak outward. On a windy world, such rays would blur and soften with time. Here they stay crisp far from their source, broken only by impacts younger than they are. You let your eye follow one thread until it dissolves into the texture of the plane. The return to uniform tone has no sting. You expected it. Predictability removes the need to brace. The ship stays smooth. No buffeting strikes the hull. No turbulence shifts the nose. You trim once to keep your angle and then leave the controls. A machine likes conditions like this. It can hold a path with minimal work. Your body likes them too. It can hold a posture without cues to tighten or shift. Shoulders remain low. Hands rest without adjusting their grip. The chair feels more present because you stop moving against it. With no breeze to carry sound, there is no outdoor noise. Impacts, rare as they are, happen without air to boom. Surface grains do not rattle together. Nothing rustles. The soundscape reduces to the ship's systems. Fans turn. Electronics tick at rates too slow to notice unless you seek them. The quiet reaches the part of you that listens for alarms. It hears none. It allows your breath to set the only tempo you need. You skim a field where tiny pits dot the ground at even spacing, a string of secondaries laid out by an old throw of debris. Each pit is a small bowl with a small rim, each with a small wedge of shade pointing away from the sun. The wedges make a row of black commas, each the same size for a long span. You trace along them and find your mind treating them like a line of soft beats. Nothing cuts the line. The beats continue past the edge of your view and return under the other side. This is not emptiness. It is calm made by the lack of drivers. No weather means no alerts. No alerts means the body does not prepare for action that never arrives. The ground holds its pose. The sky stays black. The sun sets a steady condition instead of an ever-shifting one. You notice how ease starts to feel normal. Effort becomes the exception. You lean back into the seat a little further and let your attention widen to include the whole frame. Light on stone, stone holding shadow, shadow keeping its reach. The scene offers no demands, and because it does not, you meet it with less. Beneath that ease, something else begins to make itself known, not a sight, but a presence you feel in the instruments and in the ship itself. An unseen shield humming at the edge of awareness, quiet and sure. A comfort you do not see, but can sense. How does a small world keep a magnetic promise? You steer toward a quiet threshold where instruments nudge from steady to steadier, and the stream of charged particles begins to arc. The shift is slight. Counters that mark high energy hits drop a notch. Angle sensors note a turn in the wind you cannot feel. You pass through a boundary that has no color and no edge you can see, but it meets the solar flow with a firm suggestion: go around. So close to the sun, abrasion seems like the rule. You expect constant impact, a spray of ions cutting lines into any exposed field. Instead, a core that still moves enough to generate current sets up a buffer. The ship rides into the planet's magnetic reach, not a fortress, not a shield that throws sparks, but a shaped region that takes incoming force and redirects it. The feeling is of entering a room where the noise outside lowers by a few decibels. You still hear it. It just stops pressing. You watch the data rather than the view. The magnetometer trace, steady in deep space, picks up a vector that swings gently and holds. The line bends and returns, then bends again. It is the signature of a field with a simple dipole shape made uneven by the push of the solar wind. The day side compresses, the night side stretches into a tail. The numbers tell you where you are in that shape more clearly than the window does. The hull's hum does not change, but your chest does. The signal of safety reaches you before you think about why. You have read that this field surprised the first visitors. The fact that a small planet maintains an active magnetism at all points to an interior that has not gone still. Heat remains, melt remains, motion remains, enough to drive a dynamo that keeps a faint global field. Later mapping refined the picture and found the center offset, the strength lower than Earth's by orders of magnitude, the whole system tilted and skewed by the sun's push. It is not grand, it is not loud, it is present. Treat it like a soft envelope instead of a wall. At the bow, plasma slows and flows around, guided by invisible lines. On the flanks, particles graze and slide, some caught, some sent down the tail. At the poles, where lines dip inward, a fraction still finds paths toward the surface. The interaction is not a hard stop. It is a negotiation. Enough deflection to thin the stream, enough structure to turn a blunt force into a curve. The effect is small but real, and your nervous system reads small and real as enough. The field carries asymmetries that matter. The sunward side presses the boundary close to the surface. The nightward side trails far, a narrow ribbon that flaps under gusts from the star. When the solar wind strengthens, the envelope shrinks. When it weakens, the boundary relaxes outward. Instruments log these breaths. To you, they feel like tides against the mind, gentle pulls in and out that never break the dock lines. Strength values here sit low compared to home, but numbers do not need volume to carry meaning. The count of particle hits per second drops again. The energy distribution shifts towards softer strikes. The ship's outer skin takes less of a peppering. You do not hear silence get quieter, but your shoulders mark it. They lower another degree. Eyes, already steady, soften another notch. The concept becomes clear. Protection can be minimal and still be sufficient. On the downstream side, you cross field lines that reach long behind the planet. The data plots trace the tail as a simple, elegant sweep. You think of it less as a shield and more as a hand placed between you and the hot wind. It does not block the light. It does not fight. It asks the stream to take a different path, and the stream agrees more often than not. Even that partial kindness changes the feeling inside your chest. You take the ship across the boundary again, then back in, to feel the difference. Outside, the solar wind registers as a full rush, counts high and steady. Inside, the numbers ease. The transition is gradual. No step, no jolt. The graded change itself is soothing. It says the environment is continuous, understandable. The brain likes gradients. They allow prediction. Prediction lowers effort. A field like this needs an engine. The core remains partly molten, iron-rich, and in motion. Rotation and convection make currents. Currents make magnetism. The planet is small, but small does not mean simple. Heat leaks faster, yet not all at once. Enough remains to keep the dynamo running. The result is a promise kept, not to be impregnable, but to offer structure where chaos would otherwise rule. You feel that promise in the way your breath lengthens without a decision. Regions near the poles tell the compromise. Field lines guide some particles down to the surface, creating narrow zones where interaction with the wind increases. Elsewhere, lines loop and return, forming a dome of sorts that turns the flow aside. The unevenness persists, and instruments note it. Your body does not need the map, it needs the effect. reduced strike, reduced alert. Safety signals do not have to shout, they accumulate. The hull's rate of tiny impacts drops and stays low. The radiation monitor lowers its steady tone to a softer tick. Systems reduce corrections. Autopilot trims become infrequent, small. Each reduction frees attention. Each freedom invites another small release. Jaw unclenches. Tongue relaxes. Fingertips stop doing micro-adjustments they no longer need to do. You do less. You rest more. Protection that does not boast fits this world. The field does not glow. It does not paint curtains across the sky. There is no air to make colors or waves. Its proof lives in instruments and in the way your body interprets the reduction of noise. The mind accepts a guard it cannot see because the environment stops asking it to brace. The logic is simple. Fewer hits, fewer warnings, more ease. You set the ship on a line that holds within the envelope, just inside the boundary where the cushion is strongest. The view remains the same, stone, light, shadow, but the context has changed. The invisible layer stands watch. That fact adds nothing to the frame and removes pressure from the nervous system. An unseen guard is still a guard. You let your next breath extend to the end of comfort and then sit for a moment, empty, before the inhale returns on its own. The instrument panel glows with low, steady greens, no spikes, no red flags. You mark the absence and let it count as a signal in itself. The mind registers no action required and stops preparing the next move. It chooses stillness because stillness is now the most accurate response. You sink deeper into the chair, shoulder blades spread. The exhale lasts longer than the inhale and ends without a push. Ahead, the ground rises in a slow arc. The planet's pull will meet you there, not to press, but to guide. You nudge the nose down, letting the envelope carry you as far as it goes. The soft field tapers. The particle counts climb a little. The sense of being guarded remains like a hand on your back even after it lifts. The ship eases into a low glide, and gravity's hand feels careful, not heavy. Can gravity feel like a lullaby? You bring the ship down until the ground owns most of the window, and the planet's pull becomes clear. It is there, it is steady, it does not hurry you. The nose tips a fraction, and the curve beneath you answers with the same fraction, as if a quiet hand guided the arc under your keel. You expect the tug to announce itself. It doesn't. It suggests a path and lets you choose to follow. You skim low over plains where shadows lie in neat wedges. The pull reads as a suggestion, more than a demand. A constant nudge that asks you to match the world's slow bend. Gravity often comes with a sense of weight, muscles bracing, joints loading, the ship eager to sink. Here it reads as guidance. The hull takes the curve and settles into it, not as a drop, but as a long glide that wants only small trims. You keep the ship's pitch almost level, allowing the ground to roll under you like a calm track. The horizon holds its roundness. There is no sense of falling, only of following a shallow bowl that keeps widening. You test a gentle bank to the left, then ease back to center. The arc stretches rather than tightens. Every motion lengthens, never snaps. You find your hands relax on the controls because nothing tries to tip you forward or pull you down. Near the surface, the numbers fall into place without fuss. The pull here sits well below what your body knows from home, so momentum carries you farther for the same effort. Let the ship run, and the arc extends on its own. Lift and weight meet at a lower line, so you need less thrust to keep the skim. The margin between glide and climb opens wide, giving you room to breathe. You try a small descent, then a shallow flare. The path responds with patience. At this pull, the escape from the surface takes speed, but not the kind that threatens the calm. You are not leaving, you are staying. And staying asks less of the engines. The ship agrees. The hum in the hull keeps its low tone, and your breath adjusts to match the drawn-out rhythm of the ground's curvature. With less pull, your inner ear quiets. The small canals that tell you where up and down live do not shout about sudden shifts, because there aren't any. Your eyes and your body align without the usual negotiation. A slow roll feels slower, a light pitch feels lighter. The sense of effort drops. Muscles that would normally brace for a change in load find no change to meet. They soften and stay soft. You pass over a long ridge, and gravity's hand invites you to ride the contour. You let the nose track parallel to the crest, then cross it with a mild dip. The ship does not lurch on the lee side. The low pull smooths the descent, lengthens the bottom, and eases the climb. It feels like the difference between stepping down one long stair and hopping off a curb. Your breath mirrors that choice. Long step in, long step out. Downrange, a shallow basin opens, not deep, but wide. You set a glide that kisses its inner slope and rises out along the far rim with no added throttle. The curve does most of the work. Gravity guides you into the bowl and hands you back to level flight. The motion holds a predictable tempo. Trace, rise, trace. Your lungs answer with even counts that grow by themselves. You think of how reduced pull changes the tally of effort. A turn that would press you against the seat at home merely tilts you here. A correction that would spike your vestibular sense barely registers. The nervous system notes the absence of load and chooses to release. That release shows up in small places. The jaw no longer anticipates a bump. The back stops waiting to absorb a jolt. The fingers rest at the same light grip. You add a mild yaw to see if the ship wants to slide. It doesn't. The low gravity widens the path, but the controls stay honest. The nose points, the body follows, and the ground bends away in that same slow curve. Each fraction of motion buys more time. Your awareness uses the time to settle. Nothing asks for a quick fix. Nothing rushes a decision. Your breathing uses the same physics. With less strain, the diaphragm moves through its range without hesitation. Inhale travels farther before the urge to turn around appears. Exhale completes without a push. The pauses at the ends open by a beat, then two. Each cycle feels held rather than hauled, supported, not pressed, held, not hurried. The ship rides low over a field of small bowls. You thread the chain with minor inputs that feel more like suggestions than commands. The path smooths those inputs into lines you could draw with a calm hand. The hull remains quiet. The monitor logs small corrections at longer intervals. The long arc world under you plays to the same score. You test a low pass over a scarp you left earlier. The base shadow gives you a ruler. You keep your altitude steady and watch the dark band slip by. The rate is slow enough that you can keep the edge aligned with a mark on the window for several breaths. No gust lifts you, no bump sinks you. Gravity holds you in a lane that asks nothing more than attention. Small worlds often trade depth of pull for intimacy of motion. Here, closeness does not equal pressure. The grip is careful. It offers structure, not constraint. You feel that in the way the ship prefers to stay with the curve rather than cut across it. You feel it in the way your body prefers to keep pace rather than jump ahead. A longer glide carries you back toward the bright side. The rim of day swells and lights the deck. Heat begins to climb, but the airless field keeps it quiet. Radiance returns without shimmer, and the ship remains in its easy arc. The pull does not change its character when the light changes its tone. You stay with the same counts, even as the view brightens. You notice how quickly your system adopted this cadence. With less load, the reflex to brace faded. With fewer jolts, the startle response stepped back. The small muscles in the neck let the head rest. The eyes keep their soft focus and do not chase edges. The breath, set to the arc, turns into the metronome the rest of you prefers to follow. The ground falls away into a plain washed in calm light. You keep the glide shallow, and the planet keeps the promise you've learned to trust. The hold is gentle, the path is clear, the curve asks nothing from you except the choice to stay with it. Warmth returns as you cross back to the day side, a steady radiance that arrives without flare or flicker, and even heat behaves without drama. How can intense sunlight feel calm instead of sharp? You cross the bright side and meet a kind of light that does not argue. It is strong, constant, and without the flutter of glare. The deck glows with a steady wash. Edges stay crisp but do not bite. There is no shimmer across the plains, no twinkling waves to chase. The star looks large, set like a coin above the rim, yet the field between you and the ground stays clear and simple. Your eyes settle. They do not squint. The ship holds its line as if the light were a weight laid evenly across space. Heat by habit sounds like agitation. Where air moves, heat becomes a pulse. Gusts rising from flats, little whirlpools forming over slopes, sparkles at the edge of vision. None of that lives here. The warmth spreads by line of sight and through stone. It arrives in silence, fills surfaces, and leaves the same way. A sunlit rock grows bright and keeps its tone. The ground takes that brightness and does not breathe it upward as a current. You feel no lift under the hull, no rolling push. Light lands, and that is the end of the story your body needs to parse. The radiance reads as a condition, not an event. You watch a slope gather heat. It does not flicker. The highlight rises by fractions, then stays put long enough for your count to lengthen. When the ship drifts over a darker sheet of plain, the tone deepens, not because haze passed between you and it, but because the surface itself holds less light. The difference is stable. You can leave your attention on one patch and know it will look the same 3 breaths later. This reliability becomes a comfort all its own. Dayside temperatures reach high numbers, but the way they get there is quiet. No convective plumes burst upward to write their shapes in the sky. No distant mirage wobbles a horizon. Radiation does the work, photons arriving, the ground accepting them, then re-radiating in longer wavelengths, all of it without toss or surge. Conductive flows creep through stone. The process lacks drama, and your senses match that lack. The mind, built to check for fast changes, finds none, and begins to set down its tools. Constancy carries weight. It tells your nervous system there is nothing to anticipate. A steady field does not ask the eyes to recalibrate every second. Pupils hold their size. The tiny muscles that track motion get to rest. Even the skin on your face, often the first to brace under hard light, reads the cabin's moderate temperature and the visual steadiness outside and stops preparing for glare. You meet an intense source, and your body does not answer with a flinch. It answers with a slow nod. You can test the steadiness against your own rhythm. Choose a bright facet on a boulder's rim. Hold it in view. The highlight keeps its shape. It does not sparkle because there is no air to scatter it. It does not wash weak and strong because no wave passes through the line between you and it. Your breath falls into sync with the unchanging point. After a few cycles, the urge to check another patch fades. The single highlight is enough. A stable sensory field has effects you can name. Heart rate drops a degree when the world stops sending sharp edges at high frequency. Shoulders ease when the next jolt never comes. Thoughts that habitually scan for the next input begin to idle. Monotony, when it is gentle and honest, sets a cue that signals safety. The cue does not need to be loud, it needs to be consistent. That is what the bright side offers: consistency over spectacle. You move across a spread of young ejecta where the albedo runs higher. The brightness rises, but not in jumps. The surface wears the light like a uniform. Each grain presents its face and keeps it. Where the texture changes, the tone follows and then holds. A long ray cuts across older ground, a straight path of pale that refuses to blur. On a world with air, heat would wrinkle that path in shimmer. Here, the ray keeps its line. You follow it for as long as it stays in frame, and in following, you find your pace flattening to match. The cabin stays quiet. Systems do not need to chase temperature swings outside. Radiators shed heat at the same rate you planned for. Fans spin at a low, even speed. The ship does not wrestle with updrafts or sink in downdrafts because there are none. That lack of push and pull reaches your inner balance. The vestibular system, spared from sudden accelerations, goes quiet. The silence inside your head grows a little deeper. You pass above a ridge that has taken on the day's light and holds it like a reservoir. The sunward face glows in a steady band. The leeward face stays in calm shade. The divide between them is a ruler. You do not see heat bleed around corners. Where the light does not land, warmth does not follow quickly. The boundary reads as an instruction for your focus. Keep to lines, trust edges, let the big field stay uncomplicated. This instruction frees energy. With less to resolve, the mind can rest inside the frame. There is a piece of you that waits for exception. It looks for sparkle at the horizon, for a sudden flare off metal, for movement in the shadows. None arrives. After a while, that piece stops waiting. The release is small but clear. You notice your jaw slackening a fraction. You notice your exhale lengthening without aim. The steadiness outside has translated into a steadiness inside. Close to the sun, you thought you would feel pressure. You feel continuity instead. The light is not a whip, it is a field. It fills space and keeps its level. The ground warms, the ground cools, and both happen without performance. Your breath takes the hint and smooths into long lines. Inhale rises, holds, falls. Exhale follows the same arc. The pause between them thickens enough to feel like a small room you can step into and stand in for a count. You mark a final measure against time. The bright crest of a far scarp keeps its value through 10 breaths, then 15. When change comes, it comes as a slow drift, not a jump. Change you can track without effort does not tax you, it supports you. The ship gently widens its path, lifting the view to take in more of the sunlit hemisphere. The planet turns with its quiet timing, and you let that timing expand the space around you until the cabin feels larger than before. You add a small burn and ease higher, letting the curve of your orbit open. The bright face rolls under you at a rate that keeps your counts long. No glare chases you, no flicker hurries you. The planet's slow cadence takes the role of a room. You move inside it with less to do, more room to breathe, and the sense that the warmth you meet will keep its voice even as you drift. What did we learn by visiting a place that mostly stays quiet? We sent craft that could have shouted with engines and left churned wakes, but they did not. They moved past Mercury like careful listeners leaning in. They flew by, orbited, and waited. Each one treated the world as a room where a soft voice carries. The result is a story told in low tones that you can rest inside. First came a pathfinder that taught us to expect a field where few thought one would live. It crossed the day side and night side and let a magnetometer trace lines you cannot see. The trace bent in ways that said a global field holds, not a residual crust echo. That small turn of the needle took noise out of the debate. The planet is not dead inside. It keeps motion enough to generate a quiet shield. You do not need the craft's name to feel the effect. You feel the calm in having the question settled. Later, we settled in for years. A mission slid into orbit and stayed, mapping the ground in strips and swaths until the raw sphere gained texture and record. Cameras traced rings and scarps. Spectrometers measured elements in the thin exosphere and across the surface. A laser altimeter pulsed down and counted the return to draw a clean elevation map. Neutron detectors read hydrogen, where light never reaches, strengthening the case for ice in polar shadows. Piece by piece, the craft took the questions that made you brace and trim them. You did not get a torrent of answers. You got a ledger that grew with steady entries. The last of the trio travels even now, playing the long approach. 2 orbiters will separate near arrival and take their turns as listeners. One tuned to the field and the particles around it, one tuned to the rock and the thin exosphere. Until they do, the stack loops past Mercury again and again, each flyby adding small adjustments and sending down new looks at ground and field. Patience is the method. Rushing is not the point. Each pass lowers the volume a hair more. Exploration can sound like turbines and drills and flags in dust. Here it sounded like a magnetometer arm extended away from a body to avoid interference. It sounded like thermal blankets that kept instruments within narrow bands, so a sensor stayed honest. It sounded like a radio link that never rose above what was needed. The craft did their work without stirring the place. They watched, counted, and returned to the same lines until the lines held. Key moments marked the arc. A field detection during the first close passes told us the core still moves. Years later, global imaging tied names to basins and scarps and showed contraction written across the crust. Polar observations aligned radar bright patches with craters whose floors sit in cold night, and particle counts pointed to hydrogen-rich deposits there. Elemental maps revealed provinces across plains that formed in ancient eruptions, then settled. Gravity data teased out mass concentrations beneath old basins. None of that arrived as a single, "now we know." It arrived as a stack of small confirmations that made the picture cleaner. The instruments deserved their due because they kept their voices low. Magnetometers read vector and strength and drew the envelope that curves the solar wind. Imaging systems gathered frames in many colors, then stitched them into mosaics that make the scarps and rays easy to follow. Spectrometers, X-ray, gamma ray, counted photons to tell which atoms sat where. A laser altimeter marked heights to meters and made profiles of basins and creases. A neutron spectrometer listened for the right kind of quiet, the loss in counts that hints at hydrogen just beneath the surface. Each tool did one job, then repeated it until the variation fell within a narrow band. Repetition is a kind of kindness. As the data stacked, the need to anticipate eased. Before, you might have wondered whether Mercury had air that matters. Now you know it carries an exosphere, a sparse crowd that hops and falls. You might have wondered whether the sun's proximity stripped the field long ago. Now you carry the fact that a field remains, skewed and faint, but present. You might have wondered whether the poles hide anything in their long shade. Now there is strong support for ice, held by darkness and geometry. Fewer unknowns mean fewer mental rehearsals. Fewer rehearsals mean an easier breath. The missions taught technique as much as science. Fly close, then leave, then return. Map a strip, then another, then wait for light to shift and map the rest. Adjust orbit to sample different latitudes. Tune instruments today and tonight. Do not force the pace. Let the world reveal what it keeps at the rate it keeps it. This cadence feels familiar because you have been following another cadence in your chest. In, hold, out, hold. Visit, listen, return. The pattern is the same. Notice how the quiet work supports your own quiet. A magnetometer trace that repeats tells you the field will be there next pass. A laser profile that matches the last one tells you the scarp rests where it was. A neutron count that holds says the dark floor stays cold. Stability removes the internal impulse to brace for changes that do not come. Knowledge becomes a blanket, not a spotlight. It covers the need to scan. Think of the craft as metronomes set to Mercury time. The first set the tempo. There is a field. The second established the melody, basins, scarps, plains, polar cold. The third holds the note as it approaches, promising a thicker harmony when it takes position. None of them raise the volume. They lower the uncertainty. Lower uncertainty reduces tension. Reduced tension lets muscles find their neutral. This is the payoff. Information that asks nothing of you except to rest in it. You feel the missions as a rhythm now. They pass, they listen, they leave, they return, each loop adding a small clarity. Your breath follows. Draw in, pause, let go, pause. The two patterns overlay until you cannot tell which one set the other. With the portrait of Mercury deepening and staying calm, the need to anticipate loosens its last grip. You turn the ship higher, letting the curve widen and the planet as a whole come back into the frame. The listening has done its work. The field, the stone, the shadow, and the slow light sit in your mind with fewer questions hanging from them. The world does not ask for reaction, it asks for presence. You settle back into the wide, even path above the surface. The star holds its disk. The terminator draws its clean line. With the map quiet and the meters steady, the story loops back to orbit, where a slow glide becomes a room you can stay in while the planet keeps time. Let Mercury lend you its tempo, slow clocks, silent stone, constancy over spectacle, pattern over noise. Keep the simplest loop, light, shadow, breath, and let it narrow your focus until effort falls away. Choose one steady thing tonight, the hum of a fan, a line of light under a door, the weight of a blanket. Stay with it until your thoughts align. Predictable rhythm helps the mind release. Let this cadence follow you off screen. If you want more stories that keep the pace low and even, subscribe and fold a small routine around lights out. When you return, the light will still be crawling, the shadow still keeping time.